Hi, my name's Callie Barrow.
Hi, my name's Carson Christian.
Hi, my name's Holmes.
Hi, my name's Isabella Barden.
For our final project, we decided to research Ted Bundy and intend to answer the question of why Ted Bundy targeted women.
Throughout this podcast, we plan to talk about Ted Bundy's early life, his motives, and the impact he and his trial had on society.
Who is Ted Bundy?
Ted Bundy is an American serial killer in the 20th century. A newspaper in 1978 claims that Bundy was a suspect implicated in the sexual murders of at least 18 or perhaps as many as 36 young women across the country. If these accusations are true, he's one of the most prolific mass murderers in the history of the century. Ted Bundy was arrested 3 separate times. He managed to escape prison after his first 2 arrests. 10 years after Bundy's third and final arrest, he was executed.
It all started in Vermont, 1946. Ted Bundy was born to Eleanor Cowell under the name Theodore Cowell. Bundy's father is listed as unknown according to his birth certificate. His mother, Eleanor Cowell, gave birth to Ted Bundy at a young age, which resulted in Ted being raised in a home with family members always present. As a young boy, Bundy was told his biological mother was his sister. Also, he was informed that his biological grandparents were his actual parents.
Ted's grandparents both suffered from depression that often resulted in anger issues by his grandfather. Due to the grandfather's anger issues, Ted suffered from physical and mental abuse. Sources also tell us that Bundy's aunt noticed him placing sharp objects near others while they were sleeping. The aunt explains to Vanity Fair, "I remember thinking at the time that I was the only one who thought it was strange. Nobody did anything." There's speculation from experts that believe Ted's abuse and troubled childhood could have been a motive for his multiple homicides.
As years went by, Eleanor Cowell decided to move to Tacoma, Washington with her son in 1949. The two of them were staying with one of her cousins. While in Tacoma, Eleanor met a man by the name of Johnny Bundy. He worked at the local hospital as a cook. This man was the complete opposite of Eleanor's father. Johnny Bundy was a loving man and did not mind that Eleanor had a child. Eleanor and Johnny ended up getting married. Johnny ended up adopting Ted to officially make him Ted Bundy. Ted didn't want to open up to his stepdad. This was Ted's first healthy relationship with a male figure in his life. Eleanor and Johnny ended up having more children, which ended up causing Ted to push away from them even farther.
Throughout high school, Ted Bundy was socially awkward. He never got involved with sports or clubs at his school. He put all of his times into academics. Ted was then accepted into the University of Washington, where he met his first girlfriend, Diane Edwards. After Diane and Ted's relationship ends badly, he begins his relationship with Elizabeth Clover shortly 2 years later. In the coming moments, we will reveal how his relationship with both of these women influenced some of his motives. In February 1976, Bundy underwent his first trial where he was charged with aggravated kidnapping and the attempted assault of Carol Darnick. Bundy lured Carol to his car but was unsuccessful in killing her. She was able to escape Bundy's violent presence, and Bundy was later sentenced to serve 15 years in the Utah State Prison. While serving time in the Utah State Prison, detectives in Colorado began finding evidence that associated Bundy with the murder of Karen Campbell. In June of 1977, Bundy was transferred to Aspen, Colorado to begin trial there. Bundy was actively pursuing a career to become a lawyer and was able to represent himself during the Colorado trial. While doing research for his trial, Bundy managed to escape from the window and fled. Bundy was captured 5 days later but then managed to escape from prison for good. Bundy arrived in Florida and quickly found his next victims. In January of 1978, Bundy attacked 4 women at the Chi Omega House at Florida State University. Shortly after Bundy attacked the Chi Omega sorority women, Bundy killed Kimberly Leach. Bundy believed that he had gotten away with these murders until police randomly pulled him over after realizing his license plate was stolen. Bundy's Florida trial became a double murder trial where he represented himself again. In Florida of 1979, Bundy was convicted on 2 murders, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of burglary. Bundy was then sentenced to death twice, 1 for each sorority woman from FSU.
Ted's first conviction was in Utah. Cara Durant was 18 years old at the time of the crime. She was in a shopping mall where she was approached by a man who claimed to be a police detective. He told her that someone was trying to break into her car. The two of them talked for a while. Then the man asked her to accompany him to the car to see if anything was stolen. Carol looked in her car and noticed that nothing was missing. The man told Carol that the alleged burglary was being held inside the mall and that she needed to go to the station for questioning. The two of them walked through the mall. The man asked Carol how old she was and if she had any plans that night. Then he begins to ask her why she didn't want to file a complaint against the person who had allegedly tried to break into her car. The girl noticed the way he walked and dressed. Later, Carol Durand picked Ted Bundy out of a police lineup. Carol observed at the time of the crime that Ted Bundy was wearing dark patent leather shoes and was slim, weighing about 160 pounds, had greaseback hair, and had a dark mustache, which did not extend past the corners of his mouth. Carol then became suspicious of the man and asked to see his badge. Then he asked her if she would go to the police station with him to fill out a complaint since the alleged burglary was already down there. Carol walked to his car and described it as a Volkswagen with a rip on the top of the back seat, rust spots on the front, no license plate, and of light color, either white or beige. The rip was described as going almost all the way across the top of the back seat. While they were driving to the police station, Ted Bundy parked the car and Carol began to get nervous and asked him why he stopped the car. Ted grabbed her left arm and forcefully placed a pair of handcuffs on her. Carol opened her side of the door and got one of her feet out. Ted grabbed her by the arms and around the neck. Carol began screaming and asked him what he was doing. Then he pulled out a gun and pointed it at Carol. Ted told her that he was going to blow her head off. Carol managed to get out of the car, but Ted went after her. The two of them struggled outside the vehicle as she tried to free herself. She felt Ted holding a crowbar in his right hand. To keep Ted from striking her with the crowbar, she held it with her left hand. She continued to scream as loud as she could. She began to pull and scratch at Ted Bundy. She finally succeeded in breaking away from Ted Bundy. She ran into the street and managed to get a car to stop for her. She jumped into the car with the handcuffs still on her and asked the person who was driving the car to take her to the police station. Carol was questioned by 3 police officers. Ted Bundy was then sent to trial on February 23, 1976. Ted claimed that he was not guilty. However, there was human blood on the sleeve of Carol's coat, which was type O. Ted Bundy's blood type was type O. The victim's blood type was A. On March 1st, the judge pronounced Bundy guilty of aggravated kidnapping, a first-degree felony, and sentenced him to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison.
On January 12th of 1975, Karen Campbell was last seen boarding an elevator of a ski resort in Colorado. Her new body was found over a month later, 4 miles from the resort. On March 15th of 1975, Julie Cunningham went to meet her friends at a bar in Vail, Colorado. Cunningham never arrived at the bar, and her body was never found. On April 6th, 1975, Denise Oliverson was last seen riding her bike in Colorado and was never seen again. Each of these women all fit the description of Ted Bundy's victims, slim women with long, dark hair. After a Utah law student was arrested in Salt Lake City, Utah, the puzzle of who caused the disappearance of these Colorado women began falling into place. Colorado investigators learned that Bundy was an avid skier and then discovered he very well could have been in Colorado during each of these disappearances. The New York Times tells us that a check of his Chevrolet gas card showed him buying gas on the same days and in the same communities where 3 young women had vanished. Once enough evidence was built on the Colorado cases, Bundy was brought from the Utah State Prison to Aspen, Colorado, to await the murder trial of Karen Campbell. Bundy was currently studying pre-law, which allowed him to represent himself in the Colorado trials. Since Bundy was representing himself for his trials, he was allowed access to the library in order to obtain research. During the trial, Bundy managed to escape from the second floor of the library. After 5 days, the FBI located Bundy in Aspen, Colorado. Bundy was put back into prison, but then managed to escape from there as well. Due to Bundy's escapes, he was never charged for this murders and kidnappings, but Bundy later confessed to several of the murders in Colorado.
On January 15, 1978, Ted Bundy committed his most famous homicides, the Florida State Chi Omega sorority girls. A newspaper article the day after reports a club-wielding attacker crept into a sorority house at Florida State University earlier today and beat 4 young women, raped one of them, and then strangled her and another, the police said. After autopsies were performed on the 2 dead women, who had been sleeping in separate rooms, a sheriff's official said one of them had been raped. The intruder apparently entered the Chi Omega sorority house through an unlocked side door. The slain women were identified as Margaret Bowman, 21 years old, and Lisa Levy, 20, both of St. Petersburg. The other 2 victims shared a room. They were identified as Karen Chandler, 21, of Tallahassee, who was reported in critical condition, and Kathy Kleiner, 20, of Miami, whose condition was listed as fair. Shortly 3 weeks after this incident, Bundy commits his final murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, taking her from her school in Salt Lake, kidnapping her, then murdering her and dumping her body in the Swanee State Park. Bundy thought he got away, but in February of 1978, he was caught by the Pensacola police due to driving a car with a stolen license plate, and he provided a stolen license as well. 2 days later in custody, Ted finally admitted his true identity. Once Bundy's true identity had been revealed, detectives were quick to realize who they were dealing with. This was the beginning of the end for Ted Bundy, the man who had been on the FBI's 10 most wanted lists and who had been hunted by law enforcement for questioning in more than 30 killings was now under arrest and now faced a double murder trial. Bundy's arrests and reports of his upcoming trials were quickly spread all over the news, and it was Bundy's first televised trial. One of the articles reporting, now 2 jailbreaks later, Ted Bundy sits in a maximum security cell in Tallahassee, Florida, involved in yet another trial. In the old Leon County Courthouse, the prosecutor will accuse Ted Bundy of being the masked intruder who last winter slipped into the upstairs room of the Chi Omega sorority house on the Florida State University campus, and in a burst of madness, used a tree limb to savagely smash the heads of 4 young women asleep in bed, raping and strangling the life out of 2 of them, then racing a few blocks to the apartment of an art student and beating her and nearly to death before the murderous frenzy was spent. On July 24, 1979, Bundy was presented in court for the Chi Omega killings and attempted killings. While in court, a series of evidence was produced that unmistakably proved Bundy as guilty. The state's case against him in the Tallahassee murders apparently is based on one important piece of evidence of a kind, rarely introduced in a court of law. The prosecution's star witness is a forensic ontologist, Dr. Richard R. Suverin of Miami, who's publicly stated that he can prove that the bite marks inflicted on one of the dead students, Lisa Levy, were made by the suspect, Ted Bundy. No 2 grains of sand are alike, the dentist said at a recent seminar of clinic pathologists, and no 2 fingerprints are alike, and the same is true about teeth. Another major piece of evidence against Bundy came from Nita Neary, another Chi Omega member at Florida State University, who identified Bundy as the killer in court. Neary reportedly spotted Bundy walking down the stairs, leaving the Chi Omega house, and returning to his apartment complex, The Oaks, located just a few blocks away from the sorority house. Neary was able to identify Bundy with clear confidence. Newspaper article from the court case reports Neary, as with a slight scowl on her face, college student today pointed to Theodore R. Bundy as the man who fled the Chi Omega sorority house the night 2 women were killed and the 3 others clubbed senseless. Miss Neary, the only eyewitness in the state's case, has identified Mr. Bundy in court.
With the jury out of the courtroom, the state's star witness, Nita Neary, a former Florida State co-ed, said she caught a brief glimpse of a man wearing a ski cap running out the door of the Chi Omega sorority house with a club in his right hand. The state maintains that that man was the defendant, Theodore Bundy, who was charged with the brutal slaying of 2 Florida State co-eds and the beating of 3 others a year and a half ago. The prosecuting attorney led the questioning.
Do you remember the man that you saw standing at the door of the Kyle Megan house? Do you?
Yes, I do.
Where do you see the man that you saw at the door of the Kyle Megan house on January 15, 1978, courtroom today?
Yes, I believe I do.
Would you point him out, please?
At that moment, when Neary began to point at the defendant, the defense attorney objected. But moments later, Neary said she was sure that Bundy was the man.
I've had to go over this again and again and again in my mind, and I feel positive in my identification.
Notes from the court case reveal the evidence presented at trial tending to prove that appellant Bundy was the intruder at both crime scenes and the perpetrator of the 2 murders and the 3 nearly fatal beatings comprised numerous elements, some of them being direct and others being circumstantial evidence. The principal items of evidence were 1. The identification testimony of a resident of the Chi Omega sorority house who briefly saw Bundy in the house, and 2. Expert analysis of teeth marks left by the perpetrator on the body of one of the sorority house victims in comparison of the marks with the teeth of appellant. Auxiliary and corroborative items of evidence include the closeness in time and similarity of the sorority house attacks and the subsequent attack, expert comparison of hairs found in the apartment of Cheryl Thomas with hairs from the head of Bundy, the presence of Bundy in the immediate neighborhood of the Chi Omega house a few hours before the murders, the presence of Bundy on the front porch of his rooming house, also in the same vicinity, about an hour after the second intrusion and attack. 2 instances of flight in response to the approach of police officers in the weeks following the crimes, and certain incriminating statements of appellant. These various individual times of evidence, along with others, will be set out in the context of the following factual narrative. Taken together, the evidence constitutes legally sufficient proof of Bundy's guilt on all the charges. Later that day, after hours of deliberation and the large amounts of evidence provided, the jury of 7 men and 5 women find Bundy guilty of first-degree murder of Bowman and Levy and the attempted murders of Kleiner, Chandler, and Thomas. Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death for these murders. In January 1980, Bundy stood in his final trial for the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The evidence presented in court included eyewitness testimony, fibers, and hotel receipts from Lake City. Throughout all of this, Bundy never pleaded guilty, even with evidence stacked against him and an indictment written for 3 death sentences and 2 trials until days before his execution. Footage shows Bundy looking at the indictment and talking to the press where he pleads not guilty yet again. He says,
What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. You always say an indictment, all right? Why don't you read it to me? You're on file for election, aren't you? Mr. Bundy got it, didn't you? Mr. Bundy? You told me that you were going to get me. You said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go. Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary, 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree. Design or intent to affect the death of said Lisa Levy. My chance to talk to the press. Contrary to section 78204 Florida statute. I'll plead not guilty right now. And your grand jury being...
Like many death row inmates across the United States, Ted Bundy spent years in prison before his inevitable execution. After 9 years in Florida State Prison, on January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was put to death by the state by the electric chair.
Ted got into his first real relationship in 1967, where he met Diane Edwards at the University of Washington. Their relationship brought out a lot of his insecurities in which he couldn't afford to spoil her. Diane was very wealthy. She had a nice car and a great family in which Ted Bundy never had. Ted thought that Diane was out of his league. When Diane decided to end things, Ted Bundy explains that he had a desire to get some sort of revenge on his ex-girlfriend. All of Ted Bundy's victims resembled Diane. They were white and slim with long, dark hair.
Another motive to Ted Bundy's case may have been his second girlfriend. In 1969, Ted Bundy met Elizabeth Clover. Elizabeth, who is also known as Liz, dated Bundy for close to 5 years. Bundy spent most of his days with Elizabeth and her young daughter Molly. Bundy performed most of his homicides while living with Liz and Molly. One of the main questions investigators pondered throughout Bundy's entire trial is why did he never attempt to hurt Liz? Allegedly, Bundy only tried to kill Liz once. Liz believes that Bundy never actually killed her, even though he was capable of it, because she was his only sense of normalcy. Ted Bundy admitted that Liz was his touch base with reality. Liz was the only person that was stable throughout each of these murders. Many believe that Ted wanted to kill Liz, but he knew he would become a prime suspect in the case, and he's been able to escape not being a suspect in the rest of his murders. An article from Marie Claire explains many believed Bundy used Clover as his cover in order to maintain his image of a regular, non-dangerous suburban guy. It is believed that since Ted never actually killed Liz, he had to kill other people in order to fulfill his appetite of aggression.
Another one of the leading motives to Ted Bundy's actions was his deep involvement and addiction to pornography. One of Bundy's cousins reports that from a very young age, preschool-age Bundy would often sneak away into the greenhouse where his grandfather kept his pornography collection and read adult magazines for hours on end. Later in life, Bundy would admit that it was pornography that fueled his violent fantasies. In an interview hours before his execution, Bundy talks about the dangers of pornography and tells a reporter that pornography
that was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
He mentions how pornography is so easy to access, and when the wrong people access it and fall into addiction, it can lead to danger and spiral. He continues and says,
once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
The addiction that Ted had led to him eventually acting out on his fantasies, leading to the many murder cases and abuse of women. Bundy is not the only known mass murderer that has linked his addiction to pornography to his violent killings. A scholarly source from the Department of Sociology at Idaho State University states that the fusion of sex with homicide likely reinforces both the frequency of and commitment to acting upon detailed homicidal fantasies, as well as intensifies the pleasures of engaging in homicidal activities. Bundy also makes note in his interview that
I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me, and without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
this addiction to sex gets so strong that it fuels the killer to act upon their emotions and fantasies, and in Ted Bundy's case, he's admitted to porn being a large factor in his behaviors, and we can see this with his killings.
The last motive we give credit to is the way Bundy managed to live a double life that has left many people puzzled throughout the years. Psychologists have been studying the serial killer for many years. Ted Bundy's mental health and psychiatric state has been something that has always been a question by people. Bundy did not have some of the features of prototypical psychopaths. For the most part, Bundy was considered emotionally stable. Hervey Cleakley diagnosed Bundy as a psychopath when he received a mental health evaluation when he was on trial for the Florida murders. Later on, Bundy would also be diagnosed with other mental illnesses. The other mental illnesses were narcophilia, paraphilia, and sadism. Bundy was considered to be a successful psychopath. A successful psychopath is someone who has core characteristics of a psychopath but succeeds to exploit others while avoiding punishment. The case of Bundy was analyzed for several reasons. Unsurprisingly, Ted Bundy has psychopathological qualities like psychopath and narcissism that was shown in his personality. People saw Bundy as a handsome man who was quite intelligent. When he was little, his traumatizing childhood and feelings of being inadequate were early signs of his narcissistic traits. Bundy, being deeply class conscious, helped shape his homicidal targets and patterns.
After Ted Bundy's execution, he had many impacts on society.
Bundy's mother did not believe Bundy had the audacity to commit these murders. After Bundy was convicted of the murders in Florida, Bundy's mother says,
"It's wrong, we'll appeal it. It's just, what else can I say? The family will be devastated by this, but we'll stick behind him because we know he's not guilty, as do all his friends."
Vivian Winters, mother of Bundy victim Suzanne Rancourt, worries the upcoming film, extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile, could inspire copycat killers. Since Bundy's killing, there have been several documentaries, movies, and series created to bring into light the impact Bundy has left on America and the damage he created during his life. Since recent movies and series have come out about Ted Bundy's murders, people fear that he will be praised and glorified. People fear that these films will result in copycat killings. One instance in which someone tried to copy Ted Bundy was in London, outside of Southall Sikh Temple. A local man hit a woman over the head with the intent to kill her. He admitted to authorities that he tried to mimic the American serial killer Ted Bundy. When a serial killer is always in the limelight, it makes society want to mimic their lives in order to also be in the limelight.
Andre Stevens, PhD student in sociology, helps us understand why people became so fascinated with Ted Bundy. He says, "I'm sure you saw Netflix had a tweet telling people not to sexualize Ted Bundy. The truth is that the sexualization of Ted Bundy makes a lot of money for Netflix, and they're seizing on it and amplifying it as a way to boost their business. The genre of true crime has really taken off, and it's a feedback loop. The media glorified Ted Bundy in several ways, making him a popular, attractive figure for young people to watch. The media today has a believed impact on the viewers and the potential for future killers by watching certain things on film, like a glorified Ted Bundy story. In Bundy's interview, hours before his execution, he discusses society and the future for society, especially in connection to his concern about the media. He says,
"What scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV. Some of the movies. Some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today was stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff,
the slasher movies that you're talking about,
that stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence. There are kids sitting out there switching the TV dial around and come upon these movies late at night, or I don't know when they're on, but they're on and any kid can watch them. It's scary when I think what would have happened to me if I had seen. It was scary enough. That I just ran into stuff outside the home, but to know that children are watching that kind of thing today, or can pick up their phone and dial away for it or send away for it.
Bundy also continues by talking about his future and society's future by saying,
"I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me, that's for sure. I think what I hope will come of our discussion is I think society deserves to be protected from itself, because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, particularly again this kind of violent pornography, where on the one hand, well-meaning, decent people will condemn behavior of a Ted Bundy while they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the road to be Ted Bundys. That's the irony. We're talking here not just about more. What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me. Going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. But I'll tell you, there are lots of other kids playing in streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next month because other young people are reading the kinds of things and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today.
Bundy puts a large blame on pornography and violence contributing to his actions. And with the increase of this type of material in the media today, and as generations increase, he thinks that this could just cause more harm for the future of society.
Another impact that the cases had on society was the fact that the Ted Bundy cases changed the way law enforcement handled homicide investigations. The case introduced the computer as an instrument of serial murder detection. It was used to organize large volumes of information as Bundy's crimes spread over several state lines. By the time he was apprehended, 24 police agencies in 4 states were searching for Bundy. Despite the increase in sophistication of information, many of the agencies were still largely unaware that they were pursuing the same individual.
After looking at his background and suspected motives, it led us to addressing the question of what about women made Ted Bundy so upset? Why did he target women?
Bundy was known to be an attractive man. A scholarly article tells us that Bundy is uniquely familiar among U.S. American serial killers because he so strikingly resonates with normative ideals of white masculinity. He was handsome, charming, and eloquent. A perusal of publicity available photographs of Bundy reveals a montage of images that suggest a normal, if unusually charismatic man. Bundy's physical appearance allowed him to reveal himself as a normal, charming man. His appearance allowed women to approach him rather than him having to lure women into his presence. During Ted's Florida trial, a local news source says,
"I'm not afraid of him. He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody. You try to imagine yourself in his place and to see how he's feeling, looking at the pillows with blood stains and everything, if he really did it or not."
The trial has drawn women from as far away as Seattle, where Bundy is suspected of other sex murders. Why is this happening? According to one psychiatrist, it is a mixture of fear, intrigue, and in particular, sexual attraction.
And so, yes, I do think this is, in an underlying sense, a sexual attraction, using that word very broadly for the moment. But there's no question but what violence does quicken the pulse of many people, and certainly of young women.
The young women themselves aren't too sure what it is that attracts them to the trial. Are you a little scared when you look at him?
Yes, it scares me to be in the same room with him, but I know there's other people in there, so...
Why do you do it?
I don't know.
Robin Lloyd for CBS News, Miami.
Bundy's pornographic vanities, mentioned previously, connect to why Bundy chose to commit these vulgar crimes on these women. He is portraying a violent pornographic fantasies upon each of these women, and that's why he chose to commit these crimes. His attractive appearance led these women to him, and he was able to apply his fantasies in real-life situations. There are multiple explanations that could have resulted in Ted killing these 30 women. We believe he was trying to get revenge on his ex, and he was trying to fulfill his pornographic fantasies. An article from the Division of Psychology at Florida Atlantic University states, Thornhill and Thornhill hypothesized and found that reproductive-age females incur excess risk of rape by a male stranger relative to pre-reproductive and post-reproductive age females. According to this perspective, reproductive-age females incur excess risk of rape precisely because they're capable of bearing offspring. Of those males in our evolutionary history who raped a female, males who raped reproductive-age females would have out-reproduced males who raped pre-reproductive and post-reproductive age females. This quote may give reason as to why Bundy chose to rape and murder these women. In 2020, ABC created a 2020 with Bundy's previous girlfriend, Liz Clover. The entire episode's goal is to reframe Ted Bundy's hatred for women. The director of the specific 2020 series states, "I really felt we needed to hear their story so we could reframe this finally once and for all from the perspective of the women." Trish Wood, the director and producer of the series, told 2020. "And that was important to me also because I think we need to call this what it is. It's misogyny. It's hatred of women. We don't need to figure out what the diagnosis was for Ted Bundy. Simply, he killed women because he hated them. He obliterated them. So I thought it was important to reframe it."
We chose this topic of Ted Bundy because 3 out of the 4 of us are in a sorority, and Ted Bundy's most famous trial was the murders of the Chi Omega House.
One of our sorority houses has a top-tier security system. Each member has their fingerprint in the system that unlocks the door. The security system will not unlock the door if the fingerprint is not in the system. This left us wondering if the top-tier security system was due to Ted Bundy's murders at the Chi Omega chapter house at FSU.
Also, at another sorority house, we have to put in a code to get into the house, and if it doesn't work, it will beep at you, and it's very annoying.
Also, one thing I just think is interesting is one of my friends is actually Chi Omega at FSU, and they've talked to them about kind of the Ted Bundy killings that he did at the house, and just about security because their security there is really big.
We also didn't realize how trustworthy these women were of Ted Bundy.
And we also didn't realize how many lives he impacted throughout his life. Before the podcast, we thought Ted Bundy's murders were just performed in Florida. We didn't realize his murders were committed across the United States.
Something else I also thought was interesting is he only confessed to around 30 murders, but there was something that said that I think he probably did, it was over 100 were probably also undocumented, which I think is just kind of crazy. Because, I thought it was only the Chi Omega ones.
Yeah.
But
I also think it's interesting that, to this day, there's still bodies from Ted Bundy's murders that have never been found. They may have found, hair particles that did link him to it, but their bodies have never been found, and this has been close to 50 years since he was committing the crimes.
I had watched the Extremely Wicked, and the Zac Efron movie on Netflix about Ted Bundy, a year or two before this class. And I thought it was just interesting now, doing a lot more research, because the movie follows, it does a really good job of following the exact story, but it was just kind of cool to learn a little bit more in depth about the behind the scenes and what his exact motives were, because the movie didn't really talk anything about the pornography or any of that, so I thought that was kind of cool. And just to watch interviews of himself, those weren't in the movie, so I thought that was really cool too.
Yeah, for me, I watched this movie after we decided to do this for our final project, and it allowed me to kind of understand the storyline of Ted Bundy, because like we said before, some of us didn't realize that he had other murders outside of the Chi Omega house, and so I think it was important to the movie was able to show how the story connects, and then we were able to follow up off of it and create this podcast out of it.
It is interesting to see how untrustworthy women have become of other people and their surroundings.
Yeah, kind of how you had said earlier, he didn't have to really lure any of the girls, which I thought was interesting. And I think that's one thing that we talked about this in my class last year that they kind of did with using Zac Efron in the movie on Netflix, is they used this man who's super attractive that glorified Ted Bundy in a way, where these women weren't scared of him and they would just walk to him. And so now I definitely think that's not as common nowadays. I feel women wouldn't just go with some random dude.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. I'm Callie Barrow.
I'm Carson Christian.
I'm Lily Holmes.
And I'm Isabella Barden.